Greetings, my name is Martin, and when I heard about Blizzard's intended war on add-ons, I think roughly about a year ago, I was very positive about this entire development. And even though this video title and most of its content may not seem like that, I still am. Because I am one of those lunatics who would actually prefer a complete add-on ban in World of Warcraft today over playing another day with add-ons, no matter how good or bad the standard UI solutions are. In my opinion, the best version of WoW will always be the one in which players spend the most time in-game, not on external sources, and in which the game itself offers a level playing field for every player in a game that is played the way it has been designed. However, despite Blizzard's recent track record when it comes to accomplish anything really, besides reasonably good raids and dungeons as well as amazing visuals as always, when they finally announced they were actually going to pull the plug on add-ons in Midnight, I had the honest hope that they would see this as a chance to make some fundamental changes to the UI and UX as well as certain aspects of the game design at its very core. That they would actually strive to just make most add-ons redundant by making basic WoW a cohesive and complete experience for players. Well, now we're somewhere along the lines of 2.5 to 3 months away from pre-patch, and boy, did that not happen in any way, shape or form at all, huh? This is the Eye of Kilrock. Let's look into that. So let's cut to the chase. Instead of looking at the problems in design that add-ons have been trying to overcome for 2 decades now, Blizzard decided to leave the game just the way it is, but copy a handful of add-ons and call them features from now on. Now, don't get me wrong, Blizzard's way of doing this does work in the big picture. There are obviously bumps along the way, but their main goal of removing add-ons that make players substantially more efficient in combat, that will be achieved by doing it this way. I believe just calling it cheating and banning anyone from using this type of add-on support would have been way easier than their approach, but whatever. That's not what I want to talk about today. What I want to talk about is that the war on add-ons would have been a massive chance for Blizzard to really look at the core issues that add-ons have been developed around and solve them from the very ground up. Because the reality is that every add-on exists for a reason. And other than Blizzard, add-on developers have limited power over what they can and cannot change. And many of these add-ons that have accumulated over the time fix things like lacking customizability, but also simply flawed game or UI and UX design, like the god-awful way of tracking buffs and debuffs in the standard UI to this day. But for the most parts, these add-ons are straightforward band-aid solutions. They are not necessarily elegantly implemented or particularly well designed. Some are, don't get me wrong, but first and foremost, they exist to get a particular job done, on which the standard UI fails. And now Blizzard has made the executive decision to just take a handful of these, let's call them core add-ons, like DBM, Class Weak Auras, Details, Plater, and to a lesser extent also Hekili, and create their own versions of them. So what they are doing from my point of view is they have this disease of shitty game design and UI in their game and treat the symptoms of that with the same remedies that the add-on developers had to resort to for the past 20 years because they can't make fundamental changes to the game. Meanwhile, Blizzard has the option to make fundamental changes to the game, yet they decided that they would rather continue with masking the symptoms in the exact same way as the add-on developers, instead of curing the disease. And that's awfully sad to see. Because this change doesn't make the game inherently better. Besides the tiny bit of completely banned add-on functionality, the game is going to be exactly the same. I'll just have 3 or 4 add-ons less to download and manage. And from the looks of it, Blizzard's own solution are potentially going to turn out so bad that I'll still have to download 3 or 4 add-ons to fix them or make them look nice or to have any form of reasonable customizability at my hands. And apparently, in the meantime, at no moment did the people at Blizzard sit down, look at their game, look at these core add-ons and decide to look into the reason why these add-ons exist. At no point did anyone look at DBM and ask the question, what about our game design appears to be so flawed that someone felt the need to sit down, take time out of their day and do their best to solve this issue? What about our game design appears to be so flawed that millions of our players feel the need to go out of their way in order to download, install and set up this add-on to feel like they can properly play World of Warcraft? DBM and Bigwigs combined have over 700 million downloads on CurseForge alone, which sounds completely insane to me, to be honest, because in my mind that's pretty much every single person that ever even touched WoW. So let's stick with DBM as an example for the moment. The Blizzard devs looked at DBM, saw what it does and came to the conclusion, okay, so our raiders want to be yelled at by air horns whenever anything happens in the game. They need a massive text announcement for every boss ability, also preferably with some obnoxious noise at the same time, and preferably with precise instructions as of what to do on every single occasion. Also, precise timers for every boss mechanic to the second. Got it. Let's implement it like that and call it a day. No, that's not what players want. It's a band-aid solution people came up with in order to counter purple circles with undefined borders on purple ground. It's what people came up with to solve debuffs that may more or less randomly appear in your debuff bar on the 4th place between the 6 debuffs you already had on you, which however don't matter at all. It's what people came up with in order to solve coordination mechanics that simply aren't realistic to be solved in an environment of 20 to 30 random people in a group that can't really communicate or just decided that they don't want to hop into voice chat to play this piece of content right now. On the more hardcore side of things, people may feel like they require the timers to the second, because if they can't pre-plan every time they have to move and every single use of a damage cooldown perfectly, they simply won't be able to handle the damage checks of an encounter without this kind of tool. So do people want the air horns, the countdowns, the text warnings? Absolutely not. People want to play an encounter in a manner that they feel equipped to handle. They want to enter a fight in which they don't feel like they're at a disadvantage or will find themselves in a position in which it's just randomness that decides over winning or losing the fight. DBM isn't there because players want DBM. DBM is there because a big part of the player base lives under the impression that boss mechanics in this game are not telegraphed well enough by the game itself, that some mechanics that encounter designers come up with cannot properly be played with just a standard UI. Yes, implementing DBM as a feature instead of an add-on will keep that problem masked, and people will continue to read their live instructions and enjoy their air horns and pre-plan every move of the encounter according to the ability timer. But DBM is still just a band-aid solution for bad game design that someone came up with who has no control over the game design itself. Blizzard should have seen that as a pointer towards an issue in their design. But instead of that, they decided to just copy the band-aid, slap it on, and be done with it. This would have been a chance to create a much better version of WoW. But instead, the game is staying exactly as it is, with the only difference that Blizzard is now not outsourcing the work on these core add-ons to a community full of people who actually care, as they did it for the past 20 years, but instead do it themselves now. Guess we're in for a ride. And I'm only getting started. But what do you think, dear viewer? Leave a comment. I look forward to reading it, chat with you a little bit. I'm sure it's going to be great fun for everyone involved. So let's go for another one. While we're already here, details. Does the majority of WoW players want constant live feedback on their exact DPS, HPS, kickstun, and avoidable damage taken in 4 different class color-coded windows for all members of their party or raid in the corner of their screen? Well, Blizzard saw that Details and Recount have over 400 million combined downloads on CurseForge and decided, okay, so that's what players want. Here's a little secret. It's not. In the case of Details, there are tons of things that people use it for. And these things wouldn't have to be combined into a single add-on or Blizzard-owned feature. It's just how things developed over time. So let's cover a couple of these things. First and foremost, people want to evaluate their own gameplay as well as other people's. And that's important in a multiplayer game, and WoW does not really offer that on the surface level. If you have 25 players in your raid and die to an enrage timer, you want to know if you have DPS players in your group that are not pulling their weight. If you have people dying, you need a way to know why that happens. Are they standing in mechanics, or do you have healers who are not performing at the necessary level? What are the mechanics that are killing the group? Who is kicking the wrong spells or not kicking at all in M+? I'm not sure about this because I never dared to enter an M+ dungeon without running Plater, but would you even see who does a kick if you're running standard nameplates? So without Details, without Plater, without that disgusting add-on that posts a message for every successful interrupt into the group chat, you simply wouldn't know. The standard game doesn't tell you any of that, or at least not in any reasonable, digestible way straight up. But if you want to get anywhere in a group, you have to know these things. Also for yourself, whether you just want to know for sure that you've got the biggest digital dick in the group as a DPS, or you want to know if you're lacking and should maybe look into your talents or rotation in order to do better in the future. But here's the kicker. This doesn't have to be via a details window. This doesn't have to happen by precisely analyzing every second of a boss fight in the logs. That's not what the majority of the people need and want, but it's the only thing we have right now. What players want is a concise and accessible way to evaluate their own and other people's performance without having to download their combat logs and analyzing them in an Excel sheet or whatever. In an M+ environment, I think it would be perfectly good for most people if they got a statistics page at the end of the run. Because during the run, there's not much you can do about it anyway. It doesn't matter. You're not suddenly starting to push your buttons right because you see that you're doing tank DPS as a BM hunter. And let's be real here. If you're telling that rogue who kicked one spell halfway through the dungeon that it'd be really ace if he'd maybe use that kick a little more often, he'll either ignore you in the best case or curse you out, report you, and just leave the group or anything in between. But at the end of the dungeon, you'll see who kicked properly, who had the DPS output, who died how often and to what, all the data that players are interested in, presented in a digestible way. Of course, this can also be extended on, even as far as to include a parsing system, telling you how you're doing not only in your current group, but overall. 8 out of 10 warlocks of your specialization do more damage than you at this key level. This boss fight is where you seemingly lost the most DPS. This is the trash pack where you outperformed the majority of players. Did you know every other warlock plays Fire Dog, not Shadow Dog? It could be a little mix of Details, Wipe Fast, and WoW Analyzer, or even something completely different. That's the point. But the important takeaway is, no player ever asked for details. Players were looking for ways to get feedback on performance, and people need certain information, mostly in a raid environment, where they can see what exactly is killing them in a boss fight. And the base game does not give that information to players in any proper way. But giving people this kind of information can be done in a million ways, and in an RPG I'd argue that there are probably a million ways to do it more elegantly and better designed than with raw data and graphs in the corner of your screen at all times. But Blizzard saw people are using details, so they are now about to give us Blizzard-made details. And at this point you may think, the man has made his point, time to move on, watch another video, but hey, no, you wait. Because the worst offender is yet to come. Oh yeah, you think those two are really bad? You better stick around for another 3 minutes in which we talk about Hekili and the rotation assist. Feel free to take a little break and give the video a like though. I only started this channel a couple of weeks ago and every bit of support helps me tremendously. So if you find me rambling on about WoW stuff interesting or entertaining or anything in between, make sure to let me know in some way because that's what I'm making these videos for. So Hekili and the rotation assist. This example proves like no other that the people at Blizzard do not only not know what their players want, even if they know what players want, they will still rather copy an incredibly bad solution rather than coming up with a proper one. I don't want to say that Hekili or the rotation assists are necessarily inherently bad, by the way, but according to my understanding of what Ian said in the first interview on the matter, the rotation assist is intended as a learning tool for picking up a new class or getting into the game in the first place. And I'm sorry to be the messenger here, but telling people which buttons to push without any type of context is not a learning tool. It's not a great method to teach someone anything. There's one thing and one thing only that players will learn from that. Push the shiny button. Which may have a secondary effect. Players may get better and faster at pushing the shiny button. So if you consider people don't push their buttons right as the issue, it does kind of solve that. But if you should think it'd be nice if people were to learn how to properly play the game, I'm sorry, that's another big band-aid and will do absolutely nothing about that. And again, it would be so great if they would actually sit a couple of people aside who'd really think about this. Because in my opinion, this is the single biggest issue that WoW still has right now. It's not the combat add-ons, it's not the story, it's not that 20 years have passed and there are still no undead paladins. It's the way that WoW teaches its new and old players, or better, the way how it in no way, shape or form teaches its new and old players. And this really should be some sort of priority in a game that aims at a massive player base. There are games out there that have the appeal of not telling you anything, throwing you into cold water and make it part of the experience to have you figure things out. But I don't think WoW wants or has to be this kind of game. Imagine something like the prequel to the Order Hall campaigns in Legion for a moment. But instead of covering your way from champion to demigod, it will cover your way from random nobody to a proper member of your class. You'd go on a couple of adventures that teach you about the world and the class, and maybe you'd have an NPC mentor or companion at your side, who teaches you the new abilities of your class and gives you feedback on your use, like an in-game and RPG version of WoW Analyzer. Let's say you're playing a dot class and don't reapply your dots in a longer fight. Your mentor companion would tell you something along the lines of, you have to watch your shadow word pain. Whenever it's not on the enemy, you're losing out on potential damage. That's really important. If you're constantly overcapping holy power as a retribution paladin or maelstrom as a shaman, your companion would give you feedback on that. At this point, we could even start a discussion about whether or not this system could be used to deny people progress if they aren't able to complete certain challenges. No max level rogue who hasn't proven at least once that he's capable of executing a perfect Knight's Bane rotation while dodging frontals and kicking important spells on a learning fight during his class initiation campaign. But we're not gonna get into that, as this was merely an example I cooked up in 5 minutes in order to prove my point. A rotation assistant will never teach a player those things, because it's not a learning tool, it's a crutch. If you want players to actually learn the game, you can't expect them to do that on third-party websites in their own time. Many players will do that, but many won't, and there are good reasons for that. Of course, we can act like this is part of the appeal of WoW, but the reality is that it isn't, and that it's just another layer of gatekeeping bullshit, and we'd still have plenty of that in WoW, even if we got rid of all the hurdles for new players. But to come to an end with this entire matter, I didn't have high expectations for the add-on call. But I had hopes, and I'm still really disappointed that after 20 years of not fixing these issues and having the community come up with band-aid solutions upon band-aid solutions, the WoW developers are still unwilling to tackle these issues at the core, knock it out of the park, and earn back WoW's throne as the best video game out there. And they could decide to do that at any point. Instead, they decided to implement their own versions of the community's band-aid solutions. And from the looks of it, they're not even doing a particularly good job with that. This was the Eye of Kilrock. If you're interested in seeing more content like this, feel free to subscribe to my channel. If you feel like supporting me in what I do here, leave a like, leave a comment. All of this helps me a ton. Thanks for watching, and see you next time.